and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek UK. I'm Siobhan Holt. Today I'm joined by our UK editor John Harrington and also by Elena Lewis, PRWeek and Campaigns data editor. Ellie is responsible for PRWeek's insights, such as our new biz rankings and our market reports. Welcome both.
Hiya.
Hi.
So today we're going to talk about pay transparency, and we have lots of research to discuss on this. And to be transparent, that's the whole reason why you've joined us today. Ellie, you've been looking into this extensively for us. But first, I'm going to start with you, John. You've been looking specifically at how transparent UK PR agencies are being about sharing salaries on job adverts. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yes, so we've written a lot about PR recruitment recently, and one common bugbear among candidates is when job ads don't include the salary, or at least a salary range. So we wanted to see how widespread the trend is really. We looked at the websites of every agency in the PRWeek UK top 150 to see how many included salary information on the job ads. First point, and this is a bit of a side point, but 67 of the top 150 didn't have any job ads at all on their site. We assume this is either because they're not hiring or they're going through external recruiters or some other reason, but that did surprise me a bit. But getting on to the meat of this, among the agencies that did post job ads on their sites, only around 1 in 4 included the salary, and that proportion fell to less than 1 in 10 among agencies in the top 50. Amazingly, just 3 of the 33 agencies in the top 50 that posted job ads included the salaries. So it looks like PR is performing below other industries. Coincidentally, there's new research by the online careers platform resume.io or resume.io, I don't know. And this found the average proportion to be, for example, 28% in journalism, 27.7% in architecture, 27% in graphic design. There have been quite strong responses since we published this story last week, actually. The PRCA and the CIPR both urged agencies to publish their salaries. I'm going to give some quotes here. So CIPR President Advita Patel said, "This lack of transparency is outdated, unfair, potentially discriminatory, and makes little business sense. At worst, it can be used to manipulate candidates and does little more than create a culture of secrecy within organisations that undermines trust." PRCA Chief Executive Sarah Waddington, who was just announced as the permanent CEO, incidentally, congratulations Sarah. Sarah said, "In an industry that champions diversity and inclusion, a lack of salary transparency perpetuates pay gaps, excludes talented candidates and undermines the values we claim to uphold." There are many other comments too. Shiraz Gulsha, People Like Us, said, "Lack of transparency keeps people in the dark, wastes time during recruitment and fuels inequality as staff may wonder whether they are underpaid." I mean, this is just a sample of the many comments we had on this, both online and some were sent to us. So it really shows the depth of feeling about this. I'm going to highlight one more. Ketchum, which is one of the very few top 50 agencies that does publish its salaries on job ads, put out a statement. Janita Lakhanpal, who is Director Business Development and Inclusion Chair at Ketchum UK, said, "When pay scales are hidden, bias thrives." So really quite a lot of responses there. And interestingly, just before we started recording this, I got some stats through from the comms agency Jack and Grace. They are census-wide to poll just over 2,000 people in the UK. And this found that 2 in 3 job seekers won't apply for a job if the salary isn't listed. So potentially shows how employers may be shooting themselves in the foot by not including the salaries. So yeah, lots to pick up on there.
Absolutely, John. So what do you think are the reasons that they're not putting it on then?
Yeah, well, I mean, unsurprisingly, no agency bosses I spoke to would go on the record. But I heard a couple of theories. I'd say these are probably reasons rather than excuses. One of them relates to internal politics and really the sort of the supremacy of the finance department in many big organisations. So you might get the finance department insisting that salaries and bands are kept hidden because they think this is an easy way to keep costs down and a sort of no-brainer really. And they will often have more say than, say, the HR recruitment team or certainly individual line managers who might be recruiting for a role. And it's a lot of the time, these are the people who would prefer to have that salary information there. I mean, for one thing, it weeds out candidates that might expect far too much and are really not suitable for the role from even applying. So that was one reason that's put forward. Another is that relates to clients, actually. This intrigued me. There's this kind of fear, apparently, among some that clients might see how much staff at the agencies are getting paid and use it as almost a bargaining chip around fees. And another relates to the argument that banding is a bit more difficult these days because many roles in PR agencies don't follow the traditional agency structure of AE, AM, AD, and so on. So yeah, there were some of those put forward. So what do you think? Is this something that surprised you?
It did for me because, we regularly hear how transparent PR agencies are. So I was quite shocked that the figure was so low. I find it a bit interesting that they're saying that banding is harder these days, because I think in the long run, I think it would help the industry. We have industries like the National Health Service being one. They have their system entirely banded for that reason. So I think maybe further down the line, that's one way to make it fairer overall for everyone. And I slightly agree with some of the views that have been shared that it will help those that are trying to come into the industry as well.
What I'm intrigued to know is how this has changed over the years. And I'm really looking forward to doing this time next year, spending all of those many hours on all the agency websites. But certainly over a kind of 5-10 year time span, I think these trends will be really interesting to see. Definitely one we'll keep a lookout for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, according to Reuters as well, British employers are the best at this. 71% of them are actually advertising salaries. This is in general, not just PR focused, which is apparently up from 48% in 2019. So it'd be interesting to see if that trend continues.
Absolutely.
It does pose the question why PR is behind so many other industries. I suspect because there's not as much recognition about PR and understanding about PR as there are about lots of other sectors. It might just be that basically they get away with it because it's a slightly mysterious industry to a lot of people. A lot of people might know, doctors, people, NHS workers, so on, but how many people outside of our sector really know people who work in comms? Probably not nearly as many.
And also maybe the role can incorporate so many different elements. As you say there, if you give an example of a doctor, that they're pretty standard on the sort of sector and area. So maybe there's an element of that as well, John, that sometimes it's harder for certain roles because there's so much incorporated in comms and maybe in that job description. I don't know.
Yeah, it all seems quite sensible arguments really, but we'll see how this one progresses.
100%. And that actually leads nicely on to a project that you've been working on, Ellie, for us. Do you want to tell us a bit more about it?
Absolutely. So this year, PRWeek asked our top 150 agencies for information on whether they pay the living wage and to disclose their parental leave policies as part of this new transparency report, which will be released across this week and next week. So stay tuned for further information on that. So just to dive straight into it, we found that 48 of the top 150 agencies disclose that they are accredited living wage employers, while a further 67 pay the living wage, but aren't officially accredited. So that's 77% of agencies in the top 150. One important thing to note, though, is that this does not mean that the other 23% of agencies don't pay the living wage. They just didn't disclose it. So this whole thing's about transparency, not how good their policies are. Various agencies explained the importance of paying the living wage. Fergus Lawler, CEO of Purple, even claiming that it's very much a minimum for agencies these days. Pitch Marketing Group went on to say that the living wage attracts diverse talent to the PR industry and more broadly, so it's particularly important, especially for attracting those with lower socioeconomic backgrounds and groups, which is an issue across the industry. Paying the living wage is also good for the wider agency because it boosts morale and productivity and helps attract talent, according to Andrea Reid, Director of Finance at JTA. On the other hand, while acknowledging that it is the right thing to do, Liz Anderson, founder and director at Ambitious, says that it certainly puts into perspective the true cost of employing junior level staff. So now it's not far off a 30k entry level hire, which is actually quite interesting and something that agencies really need to think about with the recent increases in national insurance as well as this. It's becoming harder to hire entry level.
So what did you make of that then, John? The stats, did they surprise you?
Not massively. I think probably all or almost all the top 150 agencies do pay at least the London living wage. I would be quite surprised if more than one or two didn't. I think most sort of junior salaries are pretty much up there anyway these days. I don't think this industry has had a massive problem with paying under the living wage onto a great extent, with the exception, I would say, probably of internships, not that long ago. I don't think there are many agencies that don't pay their interns at least, well, at the very least minimum wage, but we would have thought London living wage. Certainly I'd like to see some more research into that. watch this space potentially. I think the difficulty in a way is raising prices once you've been in an entry-level role for a while. I think if the sort of the base point has been raised, arguably there's less money to reward people who are going into sort of, the second or third or fourth rung on the career ladder. And I think that's where sometimes the pinch points can be, particularly with cost of living crisis still being there. It's not arguably not as bad as it was, but it's certainly not cheap, particularly given the industry is, so London centric. So yeah, it's, as I say, not hugely surprising, but it doesn't necessarily reflect a lot of the problems that employers and employees have around pay these days.
Yeah, and I found something similar to what you found looking at those job ads, John, that there was a bit of a gap with the biggest agencies in the top 150, which I found interesting, that didn't supply whether or not they pay the living wage.
Yeah, it is an interesting one, that, isn't it? I mean, I think if I was going to give them like a little bit of mitigation, some of the agencies don't really fill in the top 150 form because they claim an exemption under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which I won't go into. It's basically a law in the States that a lot of agencies use to not disclose these fees. But I feel I'm not entirely convinced by that, because I don't think Sarbanes-Oxley means you can't disclose whether you're a living wage employer. It's really about revenue and things like that could affect market value and so on. So I think that might be a reason why some agencies just maybe didn't look at the form closely enough or something. But we'll hopefully something to pick up on next year, and we'll see how the project goes in years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely something to look into. So on the parental leave side, we found that 86 agencies, so 57% of the top 150, provided information on their parental leave policies. And on average, the enhanced maternity leave policy, so that we're counting that as 100% full pay, was 16 weeks, while for paternity leave, this was 5 weeks. Interestingly, only 6 shops offered the same parental leave for both maternity leave and paternity leave, which is quite surprising. Well, it was to me anyway in this environment. But we've seen quite big benefits from offering this. One of the shops that offered the same parental leave for maternity and paternity was Vested, which offers 24 weeks of full pay for either parent. We actually spoke to someone who is a director at Vested, Henry Adams, who recently took parental leave, and he claimed that this combination of extended parental leave and flexible working, which Vested also offers, has transformed how he's managed his family life, so he can adjust his schedule for nursery runs, take time off for any parties, but still kids' parties, let me just clarify, but also remain fully engaged in his professional work and commitments.
So how then, Ellie, does this then relate to maybe other industries? Because obviously with you working on Campaign, you look at Adland.
Campaign, a sister title to PRWeek, actually recently published its own analysis of parental leave policies based on their 2024 school reports data, so a bit further in the past, but still recent. And in Adland, the average enhanced maternity pay was actually 19 weeks. Enhanced paternity pay was the same, 5 weeks, which already in itself is a couple of weeks more on the maternity side than PR agencies. But most strikingly, the maximum number of weeks for maternity leave was 52 weeks at full pay, so a whole year. And this is versus the maximum pay in the PR industry, which was 26. So that's quite a striking difference, actually, in the maximum amount of leave. Of course, there are some caveats here where in some of these companies, you would have had to work there for 5 years to get this maximum leave, but we're just counting the highest number available. And in an industry that's close enough to 2/3 female, are we lagging? Are we behind the trend? What is happening? It's interesting to see these results.
I've got a slightly downbeat theory as to why this might be, actually. Do you think the fact that, as you say, this industry is 2/3 female, PR that is, means that having more generous parental leave policies towards women particularly is going to have more of an impact on the businesses than it would in Adland, which has a lower proportion of women in the workforce? I mean, that sounds a little bit cynical. I'm sure nobody sat back and actually came up with that idea, but I wonder if there might be something in that.
I agree, John. It as we were discussing the figures, it slightly crossed my mind that it might be an issue. But I think, as Ellie points out, that is still pretty shocking then, that this industry that is made up of women predominantly, as we say, and some of them are leaders, maybe the changes need to be happening at the top.
Yes. Well, it's interesting when we talk about transparency more generally. I mean, we've seen in the EU, there have been laws brought in to sort of force transparency around pay. It looks like the UK government has made signals that it might consider such things as well. I don't think it's got very far down the line here, but it does feel like there are going to be increased pressures on employers to be more transparent generally, and maybe with more transparency comes more generous policies. We will see.
I think you're right, John. And obviously, even yesterday in the news, we had the announcement that bereavement leave is to be extended to for miscarriages before 24 weeks. So change is definitely coming, and bosses are going to have to react to it.
Absolutely. And one more thing I think I should mention, and not to be all doom and gloom about these parental leave policies, it's that some of these agencies do have absolutely brilliant policies. And you can read more about them in the full articles, but there are great integration back to work schemes, time off for bereavement leave, time off for IVF, miscarriage, anything like that. So some of them are absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, and we should say PRWeek over several years has been highlighting some really, really good policies and approaches from employers as part of, well, what was the Best Places to Work Awards, and now the People and Places Awards. So you're right, it's by no means all bad out there by any stretch of the imagination, but there are certainly some things where I think the industry needs to look carefully around their policies.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, isn't it, as well, that they're constantly changing. It's constantly evolving, and it's just that you can't sit back. You have to keep refreshing them. And obviously, some of the best agencies keep that in mind.
Absolutely, and that makes it even more important to be transparent about how you're adapting and changing your policies to be current.
Absolutely. And you can read more on that on PR Week. So keep your eyes peeled, guys. It's coming over the next few days.
Particularly the star ratings as well.
Oh, what's this?
Well, this is something that we'll see next week. We've actually introduced a star rating system for agencies in terms of transparency. So not in terms of how good their policies are or aren't. It's just about those that have revealed the most. So this is something we spoke about a bit when we launched the Top 150 survey way back in January, February. But it's coming to fruition and it will be fascinating. So keep a lookout.
Brilliant. And while we're talking about transparency and reporting, this week PRWeek and People Like Us launched its annual pay gap project. It's returning for its 5th year. I feel like we should have fanfare there, John. But we are urging UK PR agencies to provide their data on their ethnicity and gender pay gaps. The results will be collated and rankings tables published by PRWeek in autumn 2025. So, sorry, Ellie, I feel that's going to be your area as well. Mm-hmm. But it goes without saying that this is a really important project, guys. So if you are an agency boss, please do take part. And that's all we have time for this week. So thanks so much to Ellie for joining us. And as always to John. And to you for listening. Until next time, goodbye.